In 1947, 25-year-old Jack Rome was just coming back from serving 2 hard years in the war. His wife Anne was 6 months pregnant with his daughter Iris when he was summoned for the war. Like most African Americans from the South who served in the war, Jack would come home to face even more brutality in the form of racism and hate in the Jim Crow-ran South. While he was away, his wife Anne was struggling to make ends meet. She worked multiple jobs, sometimes even working as many as 3 jobs at a time. So when Jack got home, he immediately went out to look for work. It took him about 2 days before him and his longtime friend Johnny, also known as City, because he was born in New York, would get a job with a lumber company. Jack worked at the lumber company for over a year. He worked very long hours for pennies, and still him and Ann were struggling on rent for their 2-room shotgun shack they lived in around the lake where the black community was. Jack was well known and liked in the community as the same by his crew at work. Being a hard worker on top of his outgoing personality, Jack had a unique way of making things happen, and people liked doing business with him. So when the lumber company he worked for was on the verge of shutting down, one of his supervisors would pull him to a side and give him a heads up in what was about to happen. The following 2 weeks would be it before they would send all the colored people home for good. After work one night, Jack and Johnny were walking home when Jack laid the news to Johnny. They talked about how messed up it was, and were discussing what they could do for money when they bumped into the neighborhood drunk. He was doing his usual drunk stagger around town, dancing with himself and singing out loud. Johnny started to jive with him a bit, causing the drunk to get mad. Jack calmed them down, laughing at the situation. As the drunk walked away, Jack would get the greatest idea out of that run-in. Jack brought up the idea of opening his own juke joint, and Johnny would blow up about it. Johnny played the guitar, and before the war had big dreams of making it big. The rest of the way home, Jack and Johnny would talk about their idea. The following week came and the news of the company shutting down had made its way around. Towards the end of the week, many of the workers had left for other jobs. Jack and Johnny were amongst a handful of people sticking it out until the end. On the last day, while everyone was in line for their final check, Jack's supervisor asked to talk with him before he left. He got his check and Jack walked upstairs to his now former supervisor's half-empty office. His supervisor thanked him for his hard work and time he spent with the company. He opened up his cabinet behind him, branded a cigar and offered it to Jack. Jack, seeming thrown off, a bit distracted, accepted the cigar and sat down. A white man acting nice to a black man seemed awkward to Jack, so he was a bit on edge. His supervisor presented him with an opportunity to come and work for him. He bought 2 trucks and wanted Jack to drive one. Without even thinking about it, Jack would accept. He asked when he could start, and was told to enjoy his weekend, and to be at the station on North Avenue at 5 p.m. North Avenue was the street separating the whites' side of town from the blacks. He thanked his supervisor over and over. They shook hands and his boss told him from now on just call him Hank. When Jack got outside to leave, Johnny was waiting on him. Jack explained everything to Johnny, and Johnny was happy for him. When Monday came at 5 o'clock sharp, Hank pulled up in his truck. The truck was a delivery type, with an open back that had wooden boards around to secure loads and a tarp to cover it. Jack hopped in and they set off towards the county road. Hank offered his flask but Jack declined. Hank would start to explain what he needed Jack to do. He told Jack that he was starting his own company hauling oranges out of the groves by Lake Alfred, and needed a don't ask, don't tell type of guy. Jack assured him that he was the right guy, but first needed to know the pay. Hank told him the numbers and Jack was floored by them. He would be making the equivalent of a month's pay weekly, and with that being the case, Jack would ask no questions. Jack learned his roots, and in a matter of 7 months he and Johnny had enough money stashed away to start up the juke joint. Over the time of Jack making deliveries for Hank, he would convince him to let Johnny ride with him. At first Hank was not cool with it, but eventually would let it slide. Together they made a lot of friends and made connections in the different towns they delivered to. They initially agreed to work up until it was time for the grand opening of their joint. But the process of getting it up and running would take a lot, so they set a date that they would stop delivering for Hank and focus on the juke joint. One night Jack was feeling under the weather. He didn't want to miss a night's work but was too sick to drive. When Johnny got to Jack's house to head to work, Johnny asked if Jack would be okay if he drove the routes just for that night. Jack was reluctant at first, but thought about it and agreed. He begged for Johnny to be careful and to stay in the truck. Jack was scared that if Hank found out he would be upset. Johnny promised he would be careful and stay in the truck, and he would leave out. The next afternoon Johnny went over to Jack's house. He let Jack know how everything went the night before, assuring him everything went swell with no problems. They began talking about the juke joint and Johnny seemed more excited about it than usual. Jack teased him a bit but Johnny was just going on and on. He would end up suggesting that they go ahead and quit now. Jack didn't agree with it, he felt they needed more money saved up. But Jack would agree to quitting earlier than they originally planned. Things went smoothly for the next month. All the connections they made were coming through. They had liquor, music, a cook, and a few people to work for them. Word was getting around about the new juke joint and Jack and Johnny decided it was time. So Jack sat down with Hank and let him know that Wednesday would be his last runs for him. Hank tried to keep him by throwing more money at him, but Jack would decline. Wednesday came, and when it was time to make their last run, Johnny would offer to do it, telling Jack to stay home and put the final touches on the joint. By this time Johnny had done it a few times so Jack easily agreed. That Friday night the grand opening of Jack and Johnny's very own, Rome City's juke joint was a success, and would be a success in the black community for the next 5 years. In the summer of 1953, during Jack's daughter Iris's birthday party, Johnny pulled up in his brand new Cadillac with a big gift for his goddaughter Iris. He gave Iris her gift and called Jack in the back room. He informed that one of their liquor guys got raided and he needed to find someone quick before they run out. Later that day Jack and Johnny went over to Tampa to a guy they heard about they could get steady shipments from. They struck a deal, but because they were new, and the shipping distance was a hassle, the tab they had to clear would go up a significant amount. A few weeks of paying this tab would cause a few problems. Jack had strict rules about his prices, refusing to overcharge anyone who wasn't white. The connection they secured allowed them to do so. After closing up one night, Johnny and Jack were adding up the money and trying to brainstorm up an idea to turn more profits. And that's when Johnny brought up an idea that seemed out of line. Johnny told Jack that he knew a guy that he could get marijuana and heroin from. Before Johnny could finish Jack would cut him off with a stern no. The two argued about it, and at the end of it neither of them changed their point of view. The next couple of nights would be rough. Jack and Johnny weren't seeing eye to eye, the tab for their shipment was eating away at profits and their styles of management were beginning to clash. Eventually it got to the point that Jack would give in and tell Johnny to make the call. His friendship with Johnny meant a lot to him as well as their juke joint. So Jack was willing to get his hands dirty. Johnny gave Jack an okay, and he would go on to set up a meeting. That night Jack was down at the joint helping to set up for opening. He was expecting Johnny to come and pick him up for their meeting. It got late in the night when Johnny would pull up to the joint. Jack hastily approached him with a number of aggressive questions. Johnny was looking rough and bothered and suggested Jack to back the hell off of him. He told Jack that he went to the meeting himself. Jack was irritated by that, but Johnny went to explain. His connection wasn't friendly to people he didn't know, and when he set it all up he was instructed to come alone. Johnny told Jack that he would have called but he knew he was busy with setting up. Jack, still irritated, couldn't get a grasp on what Johnny was talking. He couldn't make out how many friends Johnny had being they practically grew up together. Jack and Johnny got their game plan together and within the next few nights they were making good money dealing out the back of the joint. Even though they were bringing in profit Jack just felt too uneasy about what they were doing. He told Johnny that they absolutely have to find another liquor connection. They can't keep this up. This wasn't his vision. Johnny would agree, and told Jack the next night he would make one more score with his guy, and they would be done. The next night, Rome City was having a good night. The neighborhood was alive and it seemed to be a smooth night. Around 11 o'clock, Jack was outside in the back heading to his car. He heard the sound of tires screeching and an engine roaring. He made his way around to look just to see Johnny's Cadillac hauling ass around the lake. He watched as Johnny slung his car in the alley down the street from the joint. He cut the lights and jumped out. When he made his way up the alley, he was looking scared as hell, trying to pull himself together when he saw Jack behind the joint watching him. Jack asked him what the fuck he had going on. Johnny, while talking like he's out of breath, told Jack that the police were tailing him and he had to cut a few corners. Jack was shocked as Johnny gave him a watery story of what just happened. Before the two went inside, Johnny would run back to grab his guitar case. Jack joked with him, asking was he finally gonna tear the house down. Johnny laughed, saying, "Hell, this bad boy gonna save the house one day." Jack didn't fully get it but laughed with Johnny anyway as they went inside. Later that night, as the crowd was dispersing and Jack and Johnny were locking it up, a woman came up to Johnny and asked for a ride home. Johnny looked the girl up and down. He looked at Jack with a smirk. Jack chuckled and told Johnny he would handle everything. 15 minutes went by when Jack heard screaming and chaos out down by the lake. He thought maybe it was just some fellas scrapping with each other over a lady or something, and continued at his tasks. For the next 5 minutes he would hear the commotion going on, when out of nowhere came a loud thunderous knock on the window by the entrance. Jack was startled. He grabbed his pistol and went over and moved the curtain to see the town drunk waving him out. Jack swung the door open to yell after the guy, telling him he's closed. The man blurted out to the best of his drunken ability, "Dem crackers done got city. They say he steal from dem." Jack asked who. "What crackers?" The drunk man said, No, dem punk ass bedsheets." Jack grabbed what he could, his pistol and keys, and bolted around the lake. When he made his way up to North Avenue, the sight he saw was horrible. The KKK had made their way across North Avenue and were causing mayhem in the black community. Jack was taken away by this. He wanted to look further but thought of his wife and daughter at home and decided to turn around. Through the commotion, Jack was alarmed when a woman came yelling and waving him down. The woman was the one that Johnny was supposed to take home. She was crying and stuttering, but managed to tell Jack what had happened. When her and Johnny pulled out of the alley and headed towards Teaspoon Alley where she lived, they reached the tracks and a line of guys from the KKK got in front of them and surrounded the car and demanded Johnny to get out. They put him in a truck and left. They took his car and made me get out and run. Jack was crushed to the floor with what the woman just told him. He told her to try and make it home and was thankful for the news. Jack hurried back home where he would tell his wife everything. He was devastated. He couldn't accept that maybe his best friend was possibly dead. About an hour later, Jack and his wife were laying in bed. Of course, Jack couldn't sleep. He just laid there worried sick about his friend Johnny. Jack got up to use the restroom. The split second his feet touched the ground from the bed, a loud crashing sound of glass being broken scared him half to death. His wife and daughter jumped up and ran towards the back of the house. Jack grabbed his shotgun and ran into the front area of the house to see that a brick was thrown through his window. When he opened his door, he would lay eyes on a traumatizing sight. A group of white-sheeted men in his yard with a burning cross. He opened his front door to confront the men with his shotgun in hand. He looked around at all his neighbors, some peeping, some on their porches with their firearms ready too. One of the men would hold his hand up and yell out for Jack to come out now. Jack yelled back, "What the fuck you honkies want with me?" The man would yell the same thing. Jack gripped his gun tighter, raising it just a tad bit, which caused the group of men to aim at Jack. The man who was talking yelled for everybody to not shoot. That's when the man stepped forward and removed his hood. It was Hank, Jack's former boss. Jack was combined with shock and confusion when he asked what this was all about. Hank completely threw Jack into a mental frenzy, as he explained that Johnny had stolen a lot from him. Jack asked him what did he steal. Another one of the hooded men yelled out, "You coon, you know damn well what's going on." With Jack's reputation with Hank and the hard work that he put in with him, Hank wanted to believe that Hank didn't know anything about what was happening. Jack begged Hank to put a stop to this at once. He asked Hank where is Johnny, and Hank told him that he would be joining him shortly if he didn't give back what he stole. Jack pleaded with Hank that whatever it was Johnny did he would pay for it in time, even offering to make deliveries again until the debt was paid. Immediately the hooded man yelled out again, "Do you fuckers think that we will trust you again? That's how we got into this shit in the first damn place." The look in Jack's face was ghostly. Jack made a slight realization in his head. Hank would continue to ask Jack over and over to return what was stolen. During their back and forth pleading, a car came around the corner. It pulled up and the sheriff of the town in his plain clothes got out and called one of the hooded men over. He told the man something quickly and got back in his car driving away. When the hooded man was walking back, he shouted out to Hank, "Hey boss, we found it." Hank looked at Jack and said, "You're a real lucky Negra." The group of men formed up and left the neighborhood. Jack went back in to help his wife clean up the broken glass. The neighbors all pitched in to remove the cross from his yard and board up the window. The next few days would be rough for Jack. He hadn't opened the joint since the night with the KKK, and the neighborhood was gloomy with the after effects of that night. Jack was outside his house with his next-door neighbor putting in the window, when a young man pulled up alongside the lake. He made his way up to Jack's house and introduced himself as Sam, Johnny's cousin from over Teaspoon Alleyway. He removed his hat and told Jack he was there to let him know that the police found Johnny's body down south in the Peace River along with their Uncle Lloyd. Jack was heartbroken, but also upset because he felt somewhat betrayed by Johnny. Jack asked Sam if he knew what the exact details were. Sam sighed, and reluctantly spilled the details to Jack. He explained, when Johnny did the runs for him when they were driving for Hank, Johnny found out that Hank wasn't hauling oranges purely. He used it as a front to smuggle heroin and marijuana into the city. Johnny did some snooping around the different stops and found out where it was coming from. Well, Johnny and I put a plan together and we stuck 'em. We stashed the drugs at our Uncle Lloyd's house. Sam was about to add to the story when Jack out of nowhere punches Sam in the face. Sam falls to the ground with Jack landing on top of him with a hail of punches. Jack's neighbor broke them up. Sam was yelling and cussing at Jack, with Jack yelling back saying, "They should have found your ass in that river too." Sam went back to his car and drove off. When Jack was done with the window, he went down to the juke joint alone, grabbed a bottle and a glass and sat at one of the tables. He took a sip and started putting it all together. The information he just learned, with the events of the other night with Johnny, and he realized. When Johnny brought up he had a connection, he really meant stealing from Hank, who all the while had him transporting drugs. The night Johnny came screeching around the lake, he wasn't eluding police, he was running from Hank's men. And that's when Jack looked over at the back door. There, sitting up against the deep cooler, was Johnny's guitar case. Jack walked over and picked it up, instantly feeling that it was heavier than a guitar. He put it on the table and popped it open. Inside of the case was thousands of dollars messily stuffed in it. When Jack got home and showed his wife, she immediately said to give it back to Hank. She figured it would be a matter of time before he comes for this. But Jack had a better idea. 2 weeks later, while sitting on his porch with a cigar, Jack was reading the morning paper, delighted to see how his plan worked out. The news article was about the former head supervisor of the now shut-down lumber company, was arrested in his delivery truck by sheriffs in Lake Alfred, Florida. Sheriffs received tips of Hank Morton's operation. Investigators also linked Morton with the town sheriff, and both are in jail as of today. Jack spent some of the money to make renovations on the juke joint. He lived and ran his business in the same community for the next 20-plus years. Unfortunately, the town was expanding, segregation laws were changing up along with the landscape, and the small community where Jack and Rome City's juke joint resided is no longer standing. Hank Morton served 5 years in jail along with the sheriff. Hank would end up going to jail for the murder of his own wife and Sam Gibson, Johnny's cousin. He found them in bed together just 2 weeks after his release from jail.